Morning, y'all. We're out in the shop again today working on the GenX-J again. I've been having some bearing roaring going on coming from the back here. And so what we're going to do, we've got these new Yukon axles, supposed to be stronger than the factory ones. I came up here yesterday and pressed some new studs into them for the wheels, so those are ready to go. And we got our new bearings and seals here, so we're going to put some new bearings and seals in this rear axle. Now I've already pulled the wheels off last night and pulled the differential cover off, let that drain. So you'll notice that my Cherokee is different than a factory because I have disc brakes on the back. Now those came from a Jeep Liberty, but the process here will be the same, other than where I've got to remove these calipers and then pull the brake disc off. On the drum brakes, all you got to do is pull the drum off to get to the axle. And then also in my differential, where we got to go to remove the C-clips, I have a Power Tracks locker, so I've got a little different process of doing it, but I'll explain it as we go. So if you happen to want to do this disc brake conversion on the back of your Cherokee, go to the wrecking yard. This is what I did. I went to the wrecking yard and found there's several year Jeep Liberty that have the 8 1/4 rear axle like the Cherokee has. You find one of those and get the get these caliper brackets right here and the backing plate for the caliper, or for the disc brakes, which should be attached to that bracket. And I went ahead and bought a new rotor and a new caliper and stuff, but you can get all the parts from the junkyard vehicle if you like. But you pull all the old drum brake stuff off, and all the disc brake stuff will bolt right to that axle. You'll have to come up with a little short hose and a way to mount it. And then you'll also have to fabricate up one of these little pieces like this to adapt your brake cable, parking brake cable, to the parking brake for the disc brakes. Now this has the has a drum brake inside of here, and again you can get all that from your donor vehicle at the wrecking yard. I got mine off a 2006 Liberty. And it'll bolt right on, so that's how you can do that. So let me get these calipers. I'm going to go ahead and pull the calipers and rotors off camera, because it's not going to apply to most people's rigs. And once I get those out of the way, then we'll come back and pull the C-clips, pull the axles, pull the bearings and seals, and then go back with the new stuff. So we'll be right back. Okay, once you've got all of your brakes stripped off, whether they be just your drum on drum brakes, or if you got disc brakes like this, you got to pull the caliper and move it up out of the way and pull your rotor off. So once you got that done and you got the end of your axles exposed on both sides, what you're going to have to do is remove the C-clips in the differential that hold the axle on. Now I have this locker in mine, so it's going to be different, but what you got to do is rotate your differential around till you get to the little bolt right here, and you'll pull that bolt out and then slide this pin out. And once you've done that, then you can push each axle in and remove the C-clip. Just be sure not to knock all of your spider gears loose. And once you've removed those C-clips, then we can move on to pulling the axles out and pulling the bearings and stuff off. Now I've got a locker in here. I don't have the spider gears and stuff. And in order for me to remove my C-clips, I've got to basically go backwards and take all this parts of this locker out of here. So I'm going to turn the camera off and get that done, because it's hard to film and do work at the same time. And since mine is kind of different than most people's, I'll just do that. And then once I've got my C-clips off, then we'll come back and pull the axles and do the bearings and everything. Okay, we're back. So I finally got the C-clips out. Now if you've ever run a Power Tracks or other locker with a C-clip axle, then you know getting those C-clips out of those little windows can be a bear. Basically, you pretty much just gotta spray it down with brake cleaner and keep tapping it until they finally fall out. But anyways, once you have your C-clips out, then you can pull your axles out. And that'll look, when you do it, that'll look something like this right here. You'll just, once you got the C-clip out, that thing, it'll slide right on out of there. Just like that. Grab a rag here. And we're going to set these aside. They're not in terrible shape, so I'm going to keep those for a spare. But the bearings aren't in absolutely terrible shape, but there's enough looseness there that I figured I'd go ahead and replace them while I had time. This is my daily driver, so I can't let shit go on it. So now that we've got the axles out, then what you're going to want to do, see if we can see everything here. Y'all had to bear with me for a second. I'm trying to aim a camera and I can't see the view window. Okay. Since we're going to replace this bearing, we don't have to worry about the seal. It'll come out with the bearing. So you take your slide hammer puller, stick it up in there, and then use your 4 or 5 different hands to tighten the cap down on it. So you want to get those behind the bearing, tighten that down. Hold on a second. Okay, so we've got our old seal and our bearing out. Now we're going to clean that up and get ready to put the new bearings back in. And one thing to keep in mind, you may have some residual 90 weight in here, so you want to kind of wipe it down. You don't want that dripping out on your parking brake stuff or your brake shoes if you've still got drum brakes. All right, so I'm gonna get this other side pulled out and clean these bores up, and then we'll put the bearings back in and put the axles back in and get done with this project. Well, for today anyways. Be right back. Once you've got your old bearings out and the holes cleaned up, you got your new bearings and the new seal here. So what I'm going to do, you want to find something to drive them in with. And so I went and I've got this 1 5/8 1-inch drive impact socket that'll drive that bearing in. And I've got an 1 3/4 1-inch drive socket that will drive this seal in. You want something that's just a hair smaller than the outside diameter for your driver, because you don't want to push on these rollers. You want to push on the outside of this, and here you want to push as far to the outside as you can, so you don't want to bend that. So you got your driver set aside, and then what I do, so there's a lot of discussion, a lot of debate. Some people say to just soak this in 90 weight, whatever oil you use in the differential. And some people, myself included, pack this with grease. The gear oil will wash that grease out of there over time, and it'll be fine. The reason I do that is because a lot of times you don't get a lot of gear oil out to the end of the axle housing until you've gone around some sharp corners a few times. And in the meantime, this thing is spinning around, and that's where most of your wear gets. So I just pack it with grease. The gear oil will wash it out. Same with this seal. On the back side here, I packed the back side of this lip where that spring runs around in there. I try to pack that with grease, and what that'll do is when you're pounding this spring in, it'll keep that spring from trying to pop out of its slot and cause you problems. And then I also put a little grease on this sealing lip before I slide the axle in. So all we got to do here is get this camera to sit straight. And I got my grease gun here, so we'll get a little grease. And this is just Lucas red and tacky. Also, I'll point out that you can save some money, quote unquote, around the save, by buying Chinesium bearings. Don't do it. Get yourself a set of good American made bearings. Timkins, Koyos. You're just going to have better luck if you do that than if you buy some Chinese ones. You might save a few dollars with the Chinese ones when you buy them, but that's not going to do you much good down the road when they tear up. Alright, so that's that. Let's put some in the seal here. Alright, so I got that packed with grease on the inside. And the last thing we want to do is put a very, very thin coating of RTV around the outside of that. Just in case there's any imperfections in the housing, that'll keep the oil from leaking past the outside of the seal. So let me get the RTV and put that on there, and then I'll get set up and knock these in. Okay, now we're ready to put these in. So you get your hammer and your driver. I got a rag stuck in here, keeping that oil off of my brakes. Take your bearing, sit it up in the hole there. Now the outside is a little bit where the seal rides is larger than the inside where that bearing rides. And we're just gonna tap that in. And you'll feel it when you get to the bottom, the tone will change. So once you got that in, then you want to get your seal. And you see I've put my RTV around the outside of that, and that's just a little thin skim coat. And you want to get it kind of sitting there where you want it. And we get our driver for it. And we get it. You want to keep an eye on which side is going in farther than the others. You want to try to keep it even. And again, you'll know when it gets all the way in. So when I'm talking about putting the skim coat on a seal, and the reason we put it around the outside of the seal is because oil can leak in between the seal and the housing here. And once you get it in, you can wipe the excess off of there and you're good to go. The reason that you want to put it around the outside of the seal and not around the inside of the housing is because as we knock this seal in, it pushes the excess RTV to the outside, and then we can wipe it up when we're done. If you were to put the RTV on the inside of the bore and then knock the seal in, it's going to push the excess RTV into your bearing, and that's not good. You don't want that in there, messing up your bearing, mixing with your oil, all that good stuff. So that side's put in. I'm going to go ahead and put the other side in, and then we'll stick the axles back in. So I'll be right back. Okay, so I've got the bearing and the new bearings and seals on both sides installed. And something to keep in mind if you're going to stick your old axles back in here is you'll notice that with this seal there is it's inside there a little bit. There's a lip there. And what you could do, if your old axles, if you're going to reuse your old axles, but the seal has worn a groove in the surface on the axle over the years, what you can do is instead of putting your seal all the way to the bottom of its hole, you could actually put the seal in where it's even with the outside. So that will move the area on the axle that the seal rides on to a different area where you don't have a groove. So just a little word of advice if you ever need it. But we're going to stick these axles back in, so let me grab one here and we'll pop her back in there. So we're on the downhill side of this job now. And basically when you put this in here, you just kind of want to support it because you don't want too much when you get to the end there, you're going to have to get it in the hole in the differential and get the splines lined up. Now, that can be a pain, and you've got to kind of wiggle it and jiggle it around a bit, and you'll know it. You'll know it when you get in there. There we go, just like that. So once you get both sides, your axles put in on both sides, if you've got the original gear carrier in your axle, then you're going to put your C-clips back on the ends of the axles and push them out from the inside of the carrier out, and then reinsert your pin in your differential carrier. I've got this locker that I've got to put back together, so that'll take a little bit more difficulty. But once you get your C-clips back in and your differential carrier pin back in and the little bolt that holds it, then you'll be ready to start putting all your brakes back on and filling your diff up. So let me get my other axle in there and get my locker put back together, and we'll come back to that. Alright, y'all, we have got the locker put back together and all that good stuff. Got our cover put back on and torqued down. I use those lube locker gaskets, so you can reuse it. You don't have to do any cleanup. They're awesome. If you don't have one, you should get one. They're not a sponsor or anything, but I'm gonna tell you what, that gasket is a serious time saver on these differentials. And what I like to do, everybody does things different, but as soon as I get that differential cover on, I went ahead and put oil in that thing. Takes about 4.5 pints or so of 75 140 synthetic gear oil. If you're lucky, I've got that G2 axle cover. It's got a fill plug and a check plug, so it's easy to pull the check plug out and pull the fill plug out and pour oil in the fill plug until it starts coming out of the check plug, and you're good to go. Also, it's got a drain plug, which is nice when you've done a bunch of water and you want to make sure you don't have a milkshake in your differential. It's easy to drain it out with that drain plug. So if you've still got the factory one, you pull the rubber plug and fill it up until it is at the bottom of the hole that you're filling it. Either way, it's always a good idea. I've seen several times over the years where people put the differential cover back on or what have you, whatever they're working on, and then go and work on everything else, get everything back together, and they're so excited to have it back together that they forget that they didn't put any oil back in it. So if you put oil in it as soon as you get the differential cover on, then you know it's full and there's no worries. Especially if you were doing a several day project, which this isn't. But so now what I've got to do, I've got to get my brakes put back on and then bolt the wheels back on, let it down off the jack stands, and we'll be golden. So if you've still got the factory drum brakes, all you've got to do is slide your drum back on at this point and slide your wheel on and bolt it down. Like me, if you like me, I got to put these disc brakes calipers back on. So I'm going to go ahead and do that, and then come back at the end. All right, we got the wheels back on it. It's back on the ground, ready to go back to running again. So here's an important thing. Don't forget, put your wheel lock in the vehicle. That spare tire is not going to do you a lot of good if you don't have the wheel lock with you. All right, so let's talk about why I did this. Because at the end of the day, the bearings were a little loose. But what had happened, when I put the Jeep Liberty brakes on the back of this thing, I noticed that there was an awful lot of up and down play in the axles, particularly on this passenger side. And well, being that this is also my daily driver, I didn't want to just let that go. So I went ahead and ordered the axles and the bearings and such. The axles were Yukon. The bearings are Koyo, I think, American Koyo. And the seals came from Timken. Anyways, when I was putting those brakes on, I noticed that the axle shaft had a lot of up and down play. Now I know that with these C-clip axles and the way these Chrysler ones are built, there's always play at the end of the axle, in and out and up and down. But when I noticed that, I went to the internet and also to my books, and no matter what I looked at, I could not find a specification for what the allowable amount of up and down motion in that bearing is anywhere. I know it's supposed to have some, but there's no spec that I could look up, and you can't put a dial indicator on it, nothing. So I decided that I would go ahead and buy new axles and new bearings and put them in there, and that way, even if there's still about the same amount of play, which there's a little bit less now, but it's still a good bit of play, at least I know it's right. It's brand new, everything's new, so it's got to be within spec. What that spec is who knows. So that's kind of the whole reason this happened, because normally you wouldn't even think about it until you start dumping oil out of the bearing seal, or you hear a bearing just roaring like hell, which I had a bearing roar, but that was something else. I already took care of it. Anyway, so that's why this happened. Plus, those Yukon axles, they're supposed to be 30% stronger than the factory ones, so there's always that bonus. Overall, the PowerTrack's no-slip blocker is a pain in the ass to take it apart to replace an axle, but I can't say enough about how good it's been as a locker. I mean, this is my daily driver. And that's another thing. This is I depend on this vehicle, so I can't, play around with waiting to fix stuff. So anyways, yeah, I can't say enough about that PowerTrack's locker. It is the cat's ass. It's quiet. It does the job. It digs off-road. So yeah, it's been great. They're not a sponsor. Sorry, no discount codes, but they're good stuff. So anyways, what's next? The next project is probably going to be bushings in the front end. I've got, whenever I turn hard to the left, sometimes to the right, I get random popping noises coming from right about under my feet, which just so happens to be, the area where the top control arm bolts to the bottom. And I've got rough country control arms, so everybody knows the joints on them are So what I ordered some rock joints, some Johnny joints, Curry Tech. Going to replace those, the jointed end, and then going to replace all the rubber bushings hooking control arms to the front axle. And hopefully that'll get rid of that dang clanking, because it's about to drive me nuts. So we'll see y'all in that video. That'll be the next time down the road. So hopefully this helped y'all out, and y'all have a good one. Thank you for watching.